To properly discuss Death Knights, we must discuss the nature of undeath. Throughout the world there are four types of undead. Type 1 are golems, no more or less than any other golem, but simply built out of parts of people rather than clay or steel. Type 2 are natural undead, those spirits trapped in the realm of the living or haunting the site of their death. Type 3 were those introduced into Azeroth by the first Lich King, intelligent undead. There are two varieties, those with their soul attached and those without, more on that later. And Type 4, a type we know very little about still, a pure undead, essentially all the benefits, none of the detriments. Scourge Death Knights were Type 3 of the missing their souls variety. An undead that is missing their soul means that while they have their memories, intellect, and voice, in every way that mattered, they were a completely different person. Further, someone missing their soul is substantially easier to directly enslave through domination magic or mind control. If a Type 3 undead soul is returned to them, they regain their self, but would also unfortunately retain all the memories of what they had done prior. It is this nightmare scenario that has caused so much anguish to the Forsaken. Acheris, the Ebon Hold, was one of the more recently constructed necropoli, more advanced and arguably better in a fight than Noxuramas. The second Lich King personally raised scores of new Death Knights into Acheris and tasked many of his elites with training and mobilizing them to assault the Scarlet Enclave, one of two remaining bastions of Scarlet forces in the Eastern Kingdoms. Of these Death Knights, 3 were worthy of note. Darien Mograine, the son of the legendary Ashbringer Mograine, who used the corrupted Ashbringer to kill himself in order to free his father's soul. Kultira Deathweaver, a high elf who died during the invasion of Quel'Thalas. And Thessarion, one of the knights who joined Arthas Menethil in the campaign to Northrend during the Third War. The Scarlets present were fighting even more stalwartly than usual, too, as they were defending their exodus to Northrend to follow the mad ravings of one of their leaders who was definitely not an Authrazine this time, wink wink. Many fledgling Death Knights died on the assault against the Scarlets, but those who remained were further imbued and equipped, a sort of deliberate cultivation to produce the best of the batch. This hardened force was then turned upon Light's Hope Chapel to lure Tyrion Fordring out into the open in an attempt to slay and convert him. Though, events played out oddly. The second Lich King made a personal appearance, the Ashbringer was purified and is now wielded by Tyrion, and hundreds of Death Knight elites who survived the battle, as well as those in Acheris, were freed from the second Lich King's control, their souls returned to them, their original selves restored. These Death Knights unified into the Knights of the Ebon Blade, dedicated to defeating the Scourge and their master. And Tyrion reforged the survivors of Light's Hope into the Argent Crusade. Both forces were the best equipped, most well-informed, and most dedicated to defeating the Scourge. Quite helpful to the adventurers, giving the Horde and Alliance's recent descent into more internecine affairs. Death Knights disseminated into the Northrend campaign's other forces as well. Thessarion aided Valiant's Keep's efforts to root out the Cult of the Damned spies in their midst. Kultira similarly aided the forces of Agmar's Hammer in deciphering a Cult of the Damned tome that listed its spies and agents across the entire continent. And of course they were pivotal in stopping the Scourge flow into Zuldrak, as well as leading to the downfall of Drakuru. One related assault was against an outer outpost of Ajol Narub. The entrance to this realm was defended by the undead Krikthir, the Gatewatcher before in life and now in death. Shortly past him was a gigantic spider named Hadronox, who had been planted here years ago as a last-ditch effort for revenge by the Nerubians as they fell to the Scourge. And down deep in the depths, the Nerubians' former king Anubarak held court, though now as a Crypt Lord of the Scourge. Anubarak's defeat removed a critical player from the Lich King's arsenal. The Argent Crusade sallied into the Ice-Crowned Glacier itself, buying a foothold with Vigil and Blood. On this spot they constructed a tournament grounds, each plank of wood individually blessed with holy light to endure in the harsh environs. This might seem like an odd time and place for such a thing, and it was, but the purpose was twofold. First, to weed out the weaker forces present in a way that wouldn't result in their deaths, and two, to promote unity in structure and focus so that when the Ashen Verdict assaulted Icecrown Citadel, it would be a united force. After substantial effort and planning, the tournament entered its two final trials. The former pitted the greatest champions of each of the competing nations against one another in mock combat to test their mounted skill. Shortly thereafter was Eadric the Pure, one of the Crusade's most skilled paladins and a humble man to boot. Of course, despite all precautions, some issues slipped through the cracks. Earlier, a particularly deadly knight who hailed from Westfall, or was it Silverpine, had been unveiled as a Scourge agent. In one of the more unique showcasings of Scourge Resurrection, the knight was first killed, then killed as a corpse, then killed as a skeleton, and finally killed as a spirit before he stopped getting back up. Those who succeeded graduated to the final trial, the one which would select those who would join the Ashen Verdict, the trial of the Crusader. The most dangerous and deadly foes they could muster were carefully guided in to challenge the adventurers, including a Magnetar, 2 huge Jormungandr, and a Wendigo. They even had the legendary gnomish summoner Wilfred Fizzlebang summon a Doomguard for an Eredar Lord, Jaraxxus, one of Archimonde's personal lieutenants. The next encounter was to be with the Argent Crusade's greatest knights. Unfortunately, the Alliance and Horde both took issue with the previous fight, Garrosh Hellscream insisting it was an Alliance trick, and King Varian insisting their name was besmirched. Thus, here, in the heart of Icecrown, while participating in a tournament whose entire purpose is to unify into a singular force to defeat a terrifying foe, the Horde and Alliance started fighting. And unlike some previous fights, this was to the death. The next and final fight for the surviving adventurers was against the twin Valkyr, who wielded Void and Light respectively. This was likely a deliberate ploy by the organizers to encourage teamwork, though we all see how that worked out. Regardless, the duo was felled, leaving the tournament finished, such as it was. At least until the second Lich King arrived personally to summon back a Nubarak, empowered even further than before, as a final challenge to the adventurers. The tournament concluded, the Ashen Verdict mustered, and began the assault on the Citadel.